Baby discovered a bear cub stuck in a furniture store wardrobe. What Baby did next. Furnished hope. The afternoon sun painted golden stripes across the polished wooden floors of Hartwell's Furniture Emporium, a place where time seemed to move differently than it did in the outside world. Ethan Marshall pushed the stroller slowly through the wide aisles, his wife, Jessica Brooks, walking beside him, her fingers trailing along the smooth surfaces of dining tables and the soft fabric of display sofas. Their baby daughter, little Lily Morgan, sat quietly in her carrier, her wide eyes taking in the cathedral-like space around them with the kind of wonder that only infants possess. The store was nearly empty on this particular Tuesday afternoon, save for the occasional creak of settling wood and the distant hum of the air conditioning system that kept the vast showroom at a perfect, comfortable temperature. There was something almost magical about furniture stores when they were empty, Jessica thought to herself, like walking through a museum of possibilities, each room setup telling a different story of the life that could be lived within its carefully arranged walls. The smell of fresh pine, mixed with the deeper notes of oak and cherry wood, created an atmosphere that was both calming and nostalgic, reminding Ethan of his grandfather's workshop, where he'd spent countless summer afternoons as a child. They weren't really shopping for anything specific today, just enjoying the simple pleasure of wandering through the displays, imagining different futures in each perfectly staged living room and bedroom. Lily had been unusually quiet during their walk through the store, not fussing or crying as she sometimes did during their errands, but instead seeming almost mesmerized by the play of light and shadow that danced across the ceiling. Her tiny hands occasionally reached out toward something that caught her attention. A gleaming brass lamp here, a colorful throw pillow there. But mostly she just observed with those deep, knowing eyes that sometimes made her parents wonder what thoughts were forming behind them. As they turned into a section of the store dedicated to bedroom furniture, the atmosphere seemed to shift subtly. The lighting here was softer, more intimate, with warm amber bulbs and vintage-style lamps casting a honey-colored glow over everything. The displays were arranged to create cozy bedroom scenes, complete with perfectly made beds, nightstands adorned with artificial flowers, and large wooden wardrobes that stood like sentinels against the walls. It was here that Lily began to make soft cooing sounds, the first real noise she'd made since they'd entered the store. Her sounds weren't distressed or demanding, but rather curious and almost conversational, as if she was trying to tell her parents something important. Jessica leaned down to check on her, adjusting the soft blanket that covered her legs, but Lily's attention was fixed on something ahead of them, her little finger pointing with surprising determination toward the far corner of the room. Following their daughter's gaze, Ethan and Jessica saw what had captured her attention so completely. Standing in the corner, partially hidden behind a 4-poster bed display, was an enormous antique wardrobe. It was a magnificent piece, crafted from what appeared to be solid walnut, with intricate carvings of vines and flowers decorating its doors and sides. The wardrobe seemed older than anything else in the store, as if it had been transported from another era entirely, perhaps from some European castle or manor house. The wood had a deep, rich patina that spoke of decades, maybe centuries, of careful polishing and care. Brass hinges and handles gleamed despite their obvious age, and there was something about the way the light fell on it that made it seem almost alive, as if it was breathing slowly in the quiet afternoon air. Lily's cooing grew more insistent, and she began to bounce slightly in her carrier, her excitement palpable. It was so unusual for her to react this way to anything that Ethan and Jessica exchanged curious glances before deciding to investigate further. As they approached the wardrobe, pushing the stroller slowly across the thick carpet, they noticed details they hadn't seen from a distance. The carvings were even more elaborate up close, depicting not just vines and flowers but also small animals hidden among the foliage, rabbits and birds, and what might have been deer, all frozen in wood but somehow seeming ready to spring to life at any moment. The brass handles were shaped like lions' heads, their expressions both fierce and noble, and there was a keyhole that looked like it hadn't been used in years, perhaps decades. Ethan reached out tentatively to touch the wood, half expecting it to feel cold like most furniture in air-conditioned stores, but instead it was warm, almost as if it had been sitting in sunlight. The surface was incredibly smooth, worn down by countless hands over countless years, until it felt more like silk than wood. Jessica noticed that there was no price tag anywhere on the piece, which was unusual for a furniture store where everything was clearly marked and labeled. Perhaps it wasn't for sale, she thought. Maybe it was just a display piece or something the owner kept for sentimental reasons. But Lily's reaction to it was so strong, so unlike her usual calm demeanor, that they both felt compelled to investigate further. The wardrobe doors were closed, but not locked. Ethan discovered when he gently tested one of the lion head handles. It turned smoothly, without any of the resistance or squeaking you might expect from such an old piece. As he began to pull the door open, Jessica found herself holding her breath, though she couldn't have said why. There was something about this moment that felt significant, as if they were about to discover something important, something that would change the ordinary afternoon shopping trip into something else entirely. The door swung open slowly, revealing the interior of the wardrobe, and for a moment, neither parent could quite process what they were seeing. Inside, where there should have been empty space or perhaps some sample hangers and fabric swatches, there was something alive. Curled up on what appeared to be a nest made of soft fabric samples and tissue paper was a small bear cub. It couldn't have been more than a few months old, its fur a rich brown color that seemed to shimmer in the soft light filtering into the wardrobe. The cub was sleeping, or at least it appeared to be, its small chest rising and falling with steady, peaceful breaths. Its paws were tucked under its chin in an almost impossibly cute pose, and there was something about its expression, even in sleep, that seemed gentle and unthreatening. For several long seconds, Ethan and Jessica simply stood there, frozen in disbelief, their minds struggling to make sense of what their eyes were seeing. The rational part of Ethan's brain was firing off questions rapidly. How did a bear cub get into a furniture store? How long had it been there? Was it dangerous? Should they call animal control? But these practical concerns were overwhelmed by the sheer strangeness and wonder of the moment. The cub looked so peaceful, so perfectly at home in its makeshift den that it seemed almost wrong to disturb it. And then there was Lily's reaction. Instead of crying or showing fear, as you might expect from a baby confronted with a wild animal, she was laughing. Not loudly or hysterically, but with soft, delighted giggles that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her. She reached out her tiny hands toward the cub, not with the grabbing motion she usually made when she wanted something, but with a gentle, almost reverent gesture, as if she was greeting an old friend. The cub's eyes opened slowly, as if it had been aware of their presence all along, and was simply choosing this moment to acknowledge them. Its eyes were dark and liquid, reflecting the warm light of the store, and there was an intelligence in them that was both animal and something more. The cub didn't startle or show any signs of fear or aggression. Instead, it simply looked at them, its gaze moving from Ethan to Jessica and finally settling on Lily. When their eyes met, the baby and the bear cub, something passed between them that the adults couldn't quite understand. It was as if they recognized each other, as if they were communicating in some language that predated words, a language of pure emotion and connection. Jessica's hand found Ethan's and squeezed it tightly, not out of fear, but out of a need to confirm that he was seeing the same thing she was, that this wasn't some strange dream or hallucination brought on by the afternoon heat and the hypnotic atmosphere of the furniture store. The cub yawned, revealing small white teeth and a pink tongue, then stretched luxuriously, its movements graceful and unhurried. It seemed completely unafraid of them, as if humans were a familiar and unthreatening presence in its young life. But how could that be? This was clearly a wild animal, not some escaped circus performer or exotic pet. The mystery deepened with each passing second, each small movement the cub made, each delighted sound from Lily. The store around them had fallen into an even deeper silence, as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The normal sounds of commerce and activity that you'd expect from a retail establishment had faded away entirely, leaving only the soft breathing of the cub and Lily's occasional coos of delight. Time seemed to have slowed down or perhaps stopped altogether, trapping them in this moment of impossible discovery. Ethan found himself thinking about all the nature documentaries he'd watched, all the warnings about never approaching wild animals, especially bears, but none of that seemed to apply here. This wasn't a dangerous encounter in the wilderness. This was something else entirely, something that defied easy categorization or explanation. The cub shifted slightly in its makeshift nest, and as it did, Jessica noticed something she hadn't seen before. There, on the cub's back, right between its small shoulder blades, was a pattern in its fur. It wasn't a scar or a mark made by human hands, but rather a natural variation in the color and length of the fur that created a distinct shape. As she looked closer, she realized it looked like a constellation, a small cluster of lighter brown fur against the darker background that resembled stars in a night sky. It was beautiful and strange, and it made the cub seem even less like an ordinary animal, and more like something out of a fairy tale or legend. Lily continued to reach toward the cub, her movements becoming more insistent, and Jessica found herself wondering if they should let her touch it. Every maternal instinct she had was screaming that this was dangerous, that wild animals were unpredictable and could hurt her baby. But something about this situation felt different. The cub seemed so calm, so gentle, and Lily seemed to know something they didn't, seemed to understand something about this creature that her parents couldn't grasp. Before either parent could make a decision, the cub moved. It uncurled from its nest and took a small step forward, then another, until it was at the edge of the wardrobe, close enough that they could see every detail of its fur, could smell the wild, earthy scent that clung to it. The cub's nose twitched as it sniffed the air, taking in their scents, and then it did something that made both Ethan and Jessica's hearts skip a beat. It reached out one small paw toward Lily, not aggressively, but with the same gentle, curious gesture that the baby was making toward it. For a moment, it seemed like they might actually touch, baby and bear, and the parents found themselves frozen between the urge to pull their daughter away and the strange certainty that this was meant to happen, that this was safe. The moment stretched out, becoming almost unbearably tense with possibility and wonder. But before contact could be made, a new sound broke the spell. Footsteps were approaching from somewhere else in the store. The steady, measured tread of someone who knew exactly where they were going. The cub's ears perked up at the sound, and it retreated slightly back into the wardrobe, though it didn't seem frightened, merely cautious. Ethan and Jessica turned to see who was coming, both relieved and disappointed that the strange encounter was being interrupted. Walking toward them with a calm, unhurried pace was an older man they recognized as the store's owner, though they'd only seen him once or twice before during their previous visits. Michael Hayes was in his 70s, with silver hair that caught the light like spun metal and eyes that seemed to hold depths of knowledge and experience. He was dressed simply but elegantly in a cardigan and pressed trousers, and there was something about his bearing that suggested he'd seen many strange things in his life and wasn't easily surprised. As he approached, his eyes took in the scene before him. The open wardrobe, the cub visible in the shadows within, the young family standing there in amazement, and instead of showing alarm or calling for help, he smiled. It was a small, knowing smile, as if he'd been expecting this, as if this was something he'd been waiting for. "Ah," Michael said softly, his voice carrying a warmth that immediately put them at ease. "I see you've met our special guest." He walked closer, his movements slow and deliberate, clearly not wanting to startle the cub or alarm the family. "Please don't be frightened. This little one means no harm. In fact, its presence here is something of a blessing, though I understand that might be hard to believe given the circumstances." He stopped a few feet away from them, his eyes moving from the cub to Lily, who was still reaching out with obvious delight. "Your daughter knows, doesn't she? Children often do. They can sense things that we adults have forgotten how to perceive." Jessica found her voice first, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. How did it get here? Is it someone's pet? Should we call someone?" The questions tumbled out, each one seeming inadequate to address the strangeness of the situation. Michael shook his head gently, his smile never wavering. "No, this isn't a pet, and there's no need to call anyone. This little one found its way here for a reason, though that reason might not be immediately clear to us. You see, this store, this building, sits on very old land that has stories stretching back long before the town was built, long before any of us were here to witness them." He moved closer to the wardrobe, and remarkably, the cub didn't retreat further. Instead, it seemed to recognize him, making a small, almost purring sound in its throat. "This wardrobe," Michael continued, running his hand along the carved wood with obvious affection, "came to me many years ago from an estate sale. The previous owner told me it had been in her family for generations, brought over from the old country, she said, though she was never quite clear about which country that was. She also told me that it had a tendency to attract unusual visitors, though I must admit, I thought she was speaking metaphorically at the time." Ethan finally found his voice, though his mind was still reeling from everything that was happening. "But it's a bear cub, in a furniture store. This doesn't make any sense." Michael nodded, acknowledging the perfectly reasonable confusion. "You're right. It doesn't make sense in the ordinary way we think about the world. But sometimes, just sometimes, the world shows us that it's far more mysterious and wonderful than we usually allow ourselves to believe. Look closer at the cub, particularly at the marking on its back. Do you see it?" Both parents leaned forward slightly, and now that Michael had pointed it out, the constellation pattern in the cub's fur seemed even more pronounced, almost glowing in the soft light. "That's not an ordinary marking," Michael explained, his voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller. "There's an old legend in these parts, passed down through generations but rarely spoken of anymore, about the Starlight Bears. They're said to be creatures that exist between worlds, neither fully wild nor fully tame, neither completely physical nor entirely spiritual. They appear at moments of transition, when something significant is about to change in someone's life, and their presence is considered a profound blessing." The cub had moved forward again, drawn perhaps by Michael's voice, or by some invisible pull toward Lily, who was now cooing excitedly and clapping her small hands together. "The legend says," Michael continued, "that these bears are woven from moonlight and forest memories, that they carry within them the wisdom of the woods and the peace of starlit nights. They don't appear to everyone, only to those who are pure of heart or who are about to embark on a new chapter in their lives. The fact that your daughter recognized it immediately, that she shows no fear, suggests that she has a special connection to the natural world that many of us lose as we grow older." Jessica felt tears pricking at her eyes, though she couldn't have said exactly why. There was something so beautiful and sad about the idea of this creature existing between worlds, appearing to bless their family. "But why us?" she asked softly. "We're just ordinary people. We're not special." Michael's smile grew warmer, and he looked at them with such kindness that it made her tears threaten to spill over. "Ah, but that's where you're wrong. Every family is special. Every new life that comes into the world changes it in ways we can't always see or understand. Your daughter, little Lily, she's going to do something important someday, something that will ripple out and touch many lives. The cub knows this, even if we don't understand how or why." The afternoon light was beginning to change, growing richer and more golden as the sun moved lower in the sky. The store, which had felt timeless and separate from the outside world, now seemed to be gently returning to normal reality. Other customers could be heard in distant parts of the building, and the ordinary sounds of commerce were slowly filtering back into their awareness. But in this corner, near the ancient wardrobe with its impossible occupant, the magic lingered still. The cub had fully emerged from the wardrobe now, and was sitting on its haunches, looking up at them with those intelligent, dark eyes. It was smaller than Ethan had first thought, probably only a few months old, and there was something almost puppy-like about its demeanor, playful and curious rather than wild and dangerous. "What happens now?" Ethan asked, his practical mind trying to reassert itself despite the wonder of the situation. "We can't just leave it here. It needs food, care, its mother." Michael raised a hand gently, stopping the flow of concerns. "The starlight bears don't exist in the same way ordinary animals do. They don't need the same things, don't follow the same rules. Watch." He moved closer to the cub and held out his hand. The cub sniffed it, then rubbed its head against his palm like a cat seeking affection. As it did, something extraordinary happened. The cub's fur began to shimmer, not dramatically but subtly, as if it was catching light that wasn't quite there. "They appear when they're needed," Michael explained, his voice soft with reverence, "and they disappear when their purpose is fulfilled. This little one came here today specifically for you, for your family, for your daughter. It's a sign that you're on the right path, that the choices you're making are the correct ones, even if they sometimes feel uncertain or difficult. The universe, or whatever force you believe guides our lives, sometimes sends us messages in the most unexpected ways. This is one of those messages." Lily had grown quieter now, but her attention remained fixed on the cub. There was something almost hypnotic about watching the two of them, the baby and the bear, existing in their own little bubble of understanding. Jessica found herself thinking about all the decisions they'd made recently, about moving to this town, about starting their family, about the dreams they had for Lily's future. They'd had doubts, of course, wondering if they were doing the right things, making the right choices. But if Michael was right, if this strange, wonderful encounter was indeed a sign, then perhaps they could let go of some of those doubts and trust that they were exactly where they needed to be. The cub stood up and took a few steps toward them, its movements graceful despite its youth. It stopped just out of reach, as if respecting some invisible boundary, but its eyes remained fixed on Lily. The baby giggled again, a sound of pure joy that seemed to fill the space around them with warmth. And then, as they watched, the cub began to change. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable, but its form seemed to be becoming less solid, more translucent, as if it was made of morning mist rather than flesh and fur. The constellation marking on its back grew brighter, actually seeming to emit a soft, silvery light that was beautiful beyond description. "It's time," Michael said softly, and there was a note of sadness in his voice, the sadness of witnessing something beautiful that can't be held or kept. "The blessing has been given, the message delivered. The cub will return to wherever such creatures go when they're not walking in our world." They watched in silent awe as the transformation continued. The cub's form became increasingly ethereal, like a projection made of starlight and shadow. It turned one last time to look at Lily, and in that look was something that transcended the barrier between species, between worlds. It was recognition, blessing, promise, and farewell, all rolled into one impossible moment. Lily reached out one more time, and this time her tiny fingers seemed to pass through something that felt like cool mist, or perhaps the memory of fur. She laughed, not with surprise or fear, but with delight, as if she was being tickled by the universe itself. The cub's form continued to fade, becoming more and more transparent until it was barely visible, just a suggestion of shape and light. And then, with a final shimmer that might have been imagination or might have been real, it was gone. The only evidence that it had ever been there was a faint scent of pine needles and earth, and a warmth in the air that hadn't been there before. The wardrobe stood open and empty, looking now like nothing more than an antique piece of furniture, beautiful but ordinary. The fabric samples that had formed the cub's nest were still there, but they looked different somehow, as if they'd been touched by something that had changed their fundamental nature. Michael closed the wardrobe doors gently, with the reverence of someone closing a book of particularly meaningful stories. "Not everyone who opens these doors sees what you saw today," he said, turning back to them. "Most people just see an empty wardrobe, maybe some fabric samples if I've remembered to restock them. But every once in a while someone special comes along. Someone who needs to receive the message that the universe is far more magical and meaningful than we usually remember." Jessica realized she was crying now, tears rolling down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of wonder, of gratitude, of having witnessed something that would change how she saw the world forever. Ethan's arm came around her shoulders, and she could feel that he was trembling slightly, overwhelmed by the same emotions. Lily had settled back in her carrier, looking satisfied and peaceful, as if she'd accomplished something important. Her eyes were growing heavy, and she yawned, showing her toothless gums and tiny tongue. "Will we ever see it again?" Ethan asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Michael shook his head slowly. "The Starlight Bears rarely appear more than once to the same people. Their blessing is given once, and that's enough. But you'll carry it with you always, in your hearts, in your memories, and most importantly, in the life you build together as a family. Your daughter will grow up knowing, even if she doesn't consciously remember this moment, that she's part of something larger and more wonderful than the ordinary world usually reveals." They stood there for a few more minutes, none of them quite ready to break the spell completely and return to normal life. The store around them had fully returned to its mundane state, with the distant sounds of other shoppers and the hum of everyday activity. But for them, in this moment, the world had revealed itself to be full of mystery and magic, and that knowledge would never quite fade. Finally, Michael spoke again, his voice gentle but carrying a note of finality. You should go home now, be with each other. Process what you've experienced. And remember, not everyone would understand or believe what happened here today. Some gifts are meant to be kept close to the heart, shared only with those who can appreciate their true value. As they prepared to leave, Jessica turned back to look at the wardrobe one more time. It stood there, solid and unchanging, giving no hint of the miracle it had contained just minutes before. But she knew she would never look at furniture or the world quite the same way again. The ordinary had been revealed to contain the extraordinary, and that revelation was perhaps the greatest gift of all. They made their way slowly through the store, pushing Lily's stroller past the displays that now seemed both more real and more dreamlike than before. Other customers passed them, absorbed in their own shopping, unaware of what had just transpired in the corner with the antique wardrobe. As they reached the store's entrance, Jessica felt compelled to share something, though she wasn't sure if it would make sense. "You know, I've been worried lately," she said softly to Ethan, "about whether we're doing right by Lily, whether we're making the right choices for her future. But after this, I feel like we've received an answer, even if I don't fully understand the question." Ethan squeezed her hand, understanding exactly what she meant. "I know. It's like the universe just told us to trust, to have faith that we're on the right path, even when we can't see where it leads." They stepped out into the late afternoon sunlight, which seemed both brighter and softer than it had when they'd entered the store. The world looked the same but felt different, charged with possibility and hidden meaning. As they loaded Lily into their car, she was already falling asleep, her small face peaceful and content. Looking at her, both parents felt a surge of love and protectiveness. But also something new, a sense of destiny, of purpose, of being part of a story much larger than themselves. The drive home was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts, processing the impossible thing they'd witnessed. But it was a comfortable quiet, the kind shared by people who've experienced something profound together and don't need words to communicate their feelings about it. As they pulled into their driveway, Ethan finally broke the silence. "Do you think she'll remember any of this when she grows up?" Jessica considered the question, watching their sleeping daughter in the rearview mirror. "Maybe not consciously, but I think it will be there, somewhere deep inside her, a knowledge that the world is full of magic, that wonderful things can happen when we're open to them. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's the real blessing the cub came to give us, not just for today but for always." They sat in the car for a moment longer, reluctant to fully return to ordinary life, but eventually they had to move, had to carry Lily inside and continue with the mundane tasks of daily life. Yet, even as they did, preparing dinner and going through their evening routine, the magic lingered. In the way the evening light fell through their windows, in the sound of Lily's contented breathing, in the glances they shared that said without words, "Did that really happen?" Yes, it did. That night, after Lily was asleep in her crib, Ethan and Jessica stood together at her doorway, watching her sleep. In the soft glow of her nightlight, they could almost imagine they saw a faint shimmer around her, an echo of the starlight that had touched her that afternoon. "She's going to be something special," Jessica whispered, and Ethan nodded, knowing it was true, even if they couldn't know what form that specialness would take. "The cub knew," he replied. "Somehow, it knew." They went to bed that night with hearts full of wonder and minds full of questions that might never be answered. But that was okay. Some mysteries were meant to be preserved, not solved, treasured, not explained. In the days that followed, life returned to its normal rhythm. They went about their routines, worked their jobs, cared for Lily, but everything was subtly different. Colors seemed brighter, moments seemed more precious, and the ordinary miracles of daily life, a baby's laugh, a sunset, a quiet moment together, seemed infused with greater meaning. They never spoke of the encounter to anyone else, honoring Michael's suggestion that some gifts were meant to be kept close to the heart. But sometimes when they passed the furniture store, they would exchange a look that said everything without words. About a week later, Jessica was putting Lily down for a nap when she noticed something she hadn't seen before. There, on the baby's back, just between her tiny shoulder blades, was a small birthmark she was certain hadn't been there before. It was faint, barely visible, but unmistakable in its shape. A tiny cluster of dots that looked exactly like a constellation. She called Ethan to look, and together they stared at this small miracle, this tangible reminder of their impossible encounter. "The blessing," Ethan whispered, understanding flooding through him. "It left a mark, a sign." Jessica nodded, tears in her eyes again. "She's been marked by wonder. She'll carry it with her always." As Lily grew, that little constellation birthmark remained, though few people ever noticed it. But her parents knew it was there, knew what it meant, and that knowledge colored everything about how they raised her. They encouraged her curiosity, nurtured her sense of wonder, and never told her that anything was impossible. They filled her childhood with stories and adventures, with nature walks and stargazing, with the kind of experiences that keep the door open to magic. And though Lily never consciously remembered the afternoon with the Starlight Bear, she grew up with an unshakable belief that the world was full of mysteries and miracles waiting to be discovered. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the stars were particularly bright, the family would sit outside and look up at the sky, and Jessica and Ethan would remember that afternoon in the furniture store, when reality had briefly pulled back its veil to show them something extraordinary. They would hold hands and watch their daughter point excitedly at the constellations, her face full of the same wonder she'd shown as a baby meeting a magical bear. And they would know, with absolute certainty, that they had been given a gift beyond price, a glimpse of the magic that underlies all existence, a reminder that we are all part of something vast and beautiful and eternally mysterious. The story of the Starlight Bear became a family secret, a treasure they kept locked in their hearts, but its influence rippled out in countless small ways, in the way they approached life with more openness and wonder, in the way they taught Lily to see magic in the mundane, in the way they never quite lost the sense that anything was possible. And perhaps that was the true blessing the cub had brought them. Not just a moment of magic, but a lifetime of believing in magic, of knowing that the world was far more wonderful than most people ever realized. Years passed, and Lily grew into a remarkable young woman, though perhaps that was no surprise given the blessing she'd received as a baby. She became a conservationist, dedicating her life to protecting the wild places and creatures of the world. She had a special gift for understanding animals, for seeing the intelligence and soul in creatures that others overlooked. And though she never knew why, she always felt a special connection to bears, always felt like they recognized something in her that she couldn't quite name. Her parents would watch her work, watch her speak passionately about the importance of preserving the mystery and magic of the natural world. And they would exchange knowing looks, understanding that the Starlight Bear's blessing was manifesting in ways they'd never imagined. One day, when Lily was grown and had children of her own, Jessica finally told her the story of that afternoon in the furniture store. Lily listened with tears streaming down her face, everything suddenly making sense. The constellation birthmark, her connection to nature, the feeling she'd always had of being part of something larger than herself. "I don't remember it," she said, "but somehow I've always known it, Does that make sense?" Jessica hugged her daughter, feeling the circle of blessing complete itself. "Perfect sense, my darling. Perfect sense." The wardrobe, they learned years later, had disappeared from the furniture store not long after their encounter. Michael Hayes had passed away peacefully in his sleep, and when the new owners came to inventory the store, the ancient wardrobe was simply gone, leaving no trace it had ever been there. Some said it had been sold, others that it had been moved to storage, but Jessica and Ethan knew better. They knew that magical things rarely stay in one place for long, that they move through the world following their own mysterious purposes, appearing where they're needed and disappearing when their work is done. But the impact of that single afternoon continued to ripple through their lives and the lives of everyone they touched. Every time they chose wonder over cynicism, every time they encouraged someone to believe in the impossible, every time they looked at the world and saw magic instead of mundane reality, they were passing on the blessing of the Starlight Bear. And in this way, the magic spread, touching lives in ways both seen and unseen, reminding people that the world was far more wonderful than they'd been taught to believe. The constellation birthmark on Lily's back never faded, and she passed it on to her own daughter, and she to hers, a small secret sign that this family had been touched by something extraordinary. Each generation told the story to the next, not as a fairy tale, but as a truth, a reminder that magic was real and that blessings came in the most unexpected forms. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the light was just right and the world was quiet enough to really listen, they could still smell pine needles and earth, could still feel the presence of something wild and wonderful and eternally mysterious. The furniture store eventually closed, replaced by a modern shopping complex, but the spot where the wardrobe had stood remained special somehow. People passing through that area often reported feeling a sense of peace and possibility, though they couldn't explain why. Children especially seemed drawn to that spot, standing there with expressions of wonder on their faces, as if they could see something adults couldn't. And perhaps they could. Perhaps the veil between worlds remained thin there, allowing glimpses of the magic that most people had forgotten how to see. Jessica and Ethan grew old together, their love deepened by the shared secret of that miraculous afternoon. On their 50th wedding anniversary, they returned to where the furniture store had been, standing in the parking lot that had replaced it. To anyone watching, they were just an elderly couple holding hands and looking at nothing in particular. But in their hearts, they were back in that moment, watching a baby and a bear recognize each other across the divide between worlds, witnessing the universe reveal its hidden magic. "Do you ever wonder," Ethan asked, "what would have happened if we hadn't followed Lily's pointing that day? If we'd just walked past the wardrobe?" Jessica squeezed his hand, her eyes still bright with the wonder that had never left her. "But we did follow. We were meant to. That's the magic, isn't it? That we were exactly where we needed to be, exactly when we needed to be there." As they stood there, a small child ran past them, chasing a butterfly. The child stopped suddenly, right about where the wardrobe would have been, and stood very still, looking at something only she could see. Her mother called to her, but the child didn't move for a long moment, her face full of the same wonder Lily had shown all those years ago. Finally, she ran back to her mother, chattering excitedly about the pretty bear she'd seen, the one made of stars. The mother laughed, assuming it was childish imagination. But Jessica and Ethan knew better. They smiled at each other, understanding that the magic continued, that the Starlight Bears were still out there, still blessing those who needed to remember that the world was full of wonder. That night, as they had so many nights before, they stood at their window and looked up at the stars. The constellation that matched Lily's birthmark was visible, bright and clear in the darkness. "Thank you," Jessica whispered to the night sky, to the mystery that had blessed their lives so profoundly. And though it was probably just the wind, they could have sworn they heard, very faintly, the sound of a young bear's contented purr, carrying across the years and the divide between worlds, reminding them that magic was not only real, but eternal, not only extraordinary, but everywhere, waiting to be discovered by those who still knew how to see with the eyes of wonder. The story of the Starlight Bear became more than just a family secret over time. Without ever directly sharing it, its influence spread through the way the family lived their lives. Lily's work in conservation inspired countless others to see the natural world differently, to understand that there were mysteries worth preserving even if we couldn't fully understand them. Her children grew up with a sense of magic that they carried into their own lives and work, becoming artists and teachers and healers, all of them touched by the blessing that had been given so many years before in a furniture store on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. And perhaps that was the greatest magic of all, not the appearance of the impossible bear or its mystical disappearance, but the way one moment of wonder could echo through generations, changing lives in ways both subtle and profound. The Starlight Bear had not just blessed a baby, it had blessed a lineage, ensuring that the knowledge of magic would be passed down like a sacred flame, keeping alive the understanding that the world was far more than what it seemed to be on the surface. Sometimes, very rarely, someone else would report seeing a Starlight Bear. Always in unexpected places, a library, a garden, a hospital room, and always at moments of transition or transformation. The sightings were never verified, never photographed, never proven, but those who experienced them were changed forever. Marked by the same sense of wonder that had marked Ethan, Jessica, and Lily, and though they never met, all these people were connected by their shared knowledge that magic was real, forming an invisible network of believers who moved through the world with their eyes open to possibility. Michael Hayes's estate, they discovered much later, had included journals dating back decades, filled with accounts of strange and wonderful things that had happened in and around his furniture store. The Starlight Bear was mentioned several times, always appearing to families with young children, always at moments when they needed reassurance or blessing. But there were other mysteries too, other magical visitors that had passed through that special place where the veil between worlds was thin. The journals were eventually donated to a local historical society, where they were filed away as curiosities, but those who read them carefully understood that they were reading something precious, a record of the magic that still moved through the world for those who knew how to see it. As for the wardrobe itself, rumors of its whereabouts circulated for years. Some said it had returned to Europe, to some ancient castle where it belonged. Others claimed it was in a museum somewhere, labeled simply as an antique, with no mention of its special properties. But those who understood such things knew that the wardrobe was probably still out there, appearing where it was needed, providing a doorway between worlds for those who were ready to receive the blessing of the Starlight Bears. Because magic, real magic, never truly disappears. It just moves on, finding new people to touch, new lives to transform, new stories to create. The afternoon in the furniture store had lasted perhaps an hour in clock time, but its impact was timeless. It had shown a young family that they were part of something infinitely larger and more wonderful than they had imagined. It had given them a story that would bind them together through all the challenges and changes of life, and most importantly, it had opened their eyes to the magic that was always there, waiting just beneath the surface of ordinary reality, ready to reveal itself to those who approached the world with wonder and an open heart. In quiet moments, usually when the light was soft and golden like it had been that afternoon, Jessica would sometimes feel the presence of the cub again. Not seeing it, but sensing it, knowing that the blessing continued, that the magic endured. She would think about all the people who rushed through their lives never experiencing such a moment, never knowing that the impossible was possible, and she would feel both sad for them and grateful for the gift her family had received. Not everyone got to see behind the veil, but for those who did, life was never the same again, and that was a blessing beyond measure. The story could have ended there, with the family blessed and the magic continuing to ripple outward through their lives and the lives they touched. But magic, real magic, doesn't follow the rules of ordinary stories. Years later, when Lily's own daughter was just a baby, something remarkable happened. They were visiting a different town, staying in an old bed and breakfast that had been recommended by a friend. In their room was an antique wardrobe, different from the one in the furniture store but somehow familiar, carrying the same sense of age and mystery. Lily's daughter, who had inherited the constellation birthmark, began pointing at the wardrobe and laughing, the same delighted sound Lily herself had made all those years ago. And when Lily opened the wardrobe doors, her heart already knowing what she would find, there it was. Not a bear cub this time, but a single perfect feather that seemed to be made of starlight itself, floating impossibly in the darkness of the wardrobe's interior. She reached out to touch it, and as her fingers made contact, she felt it, the blessing being renewed, passed on, strengthened for another generation. The feather dissolved at her touch, becoming a shower of tiny lights that swirled around her daughter before disappearing, leaving only the scent of pine needles and the absolute certainty that the magic would continue. Lily called her parents immediately, tears streaming down her face as she told them what had happened. Jessica and Ethan, now in their 80s, listened with joy and wonder, understanding that the story they had been part of was larger than they had ever imagined. The Starlight Bears, or whatever force they represented, were not done with their family. The blessing would continue, generation after generation, a secret inheritance more valuable than any material wealth could ever be. The magic recognizes its own, Jessica said softly, her voice still full of wonder after all these years. It finds those who carry the blessing and reminds them that they're part of something eternal. And so the story continued, not ending, but transforming, each generation adding their own chapter to the tale of the Starlight Bears and the family they had chosen to bless. Some might say it was just coincidence, imagination, the power of suggestion passed down through family stories. But those who had experienced it knew better. They knew that magic was real, that blessings came in unexpected forms, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe pulled back its veil to show us that we were part of something infinitely more wonderful than we had ever dared to believe. The wardrobe in the bed and breakfast disappeared the next morning, simply vanishing while they slept, leaving no trace it had ever been there. The owners were baffled, insisting they had no idea how such a large piece of furniture could have been removed without anyone noticing. But Lily just smiled, understanding that magical things had their own ways of moving through the world, their own purposes that didn't need to make sense to human logic. She held her daughter close, feeling the weight and wonder of the inheritance she was passing on, not just the story but the lived reality of magic. As she drove home with her baby, sleeping peacefully in the back seat, Lily thought about her own childhood, how her parents had raised her to see wonder everywhere, to believe in the impossible, to trust in magic, even when the world tried to convince her it wasn't real. She understood now that they had been preparing her for this moment, for the responsibility of carrying the blessing forward. And she would do the same for her daughter, and her daughter for hers, on and on through time, a golden thread of magic woven through the ordinary fabric of life. The world needed people who believed in magic, Lily realized, not naive belief in fairy tales, but the deep, grounded understanding that reality was far more mysterious and meaningful than most people allowed themselves to see. Every person who carried this knowledge was a keeper of something precious, a guardian of wonder in a world that too often forgot to look up at the stars, to listen to the whispers of the wind, to notice the small miracles that happened every day. The Starlight Bears had not just blessed her family, they had made them guardians of magic itself. Back home, Lily created a special journal, recording not just the story of the original encounter but all the small magical moments that followed, the synchronicities, the unexpected wonders, the times when the veil seemed particularly thin. She wanted her daughter to have a record, a map of sorts, showing that magic was not a single extraordinary event but a way of being in the world, a lens through which to view existence. Each entry was a reminder that they were part of something larger, something beautiful and mysterious and endlessly wonderful. The constellation birthmark on her daughter's back seemed to glow sometimes in certain lights, just as Lily's own did, just as her mother's had. It was their secret sign, their proof that the encounter in the furniture store had been real, that the blessing continued. And sometimes, when the baby was particularly happy or excited, Lily could swear she heard it again. That soft purring sound the cub had made, echoing across time and space, a reminder that the magic was always there, always watching, always blessing those who remembered how to see. Friends and family who didn't know the story often commented on something special about their family, something they couldn't quite define. There was a lightness to them, a sense of possibility, a way of looking at the world that made others feel like magic might be real after all. Without ever telling the story directly, they spread its influence, inspiring others to look more closely at the world, to question their assumptions about what was possible, to leave room in their lives for wonder. And in this way, the blessing of the Starlight Bear continued to ripple outward, touching lives in ways that could never be measured or fully understood. The furniture store where it all began was long gone, but the spot where it had stood remained special. People sensitive to such things could feel it, a thinness in the veil, a place where magic had touched the ordinary world and left its mark. Children especially were drawn to it, standing in what was now a parking lot, but seeing something else, something their parents couldn't perceive. And every once in a while someone would report seeing something impossible there, a shimmer in the air, a shape that might have been a bear made of starlight, a whisper of pine needles and earth where no trees grew. These stories were dismissed by most as imagination or urban legend, but they were collected and treasured by those who knew better, those who understood that magic left traces, that places where extraordinary things had happened remained touched by that extraordinariness forever. The parking lot became a secret pilgrimage site for those who believed, who came hoping for their own glimpse of magic, their own blessing from the Starlight Bears. Most left disappointed, seeing nothing but asphalt and ordinary buildings. But a few, a precious few, experienced something that changed them forever, adding their own stories to the growing legend. Meanwhile, other wardrobes in other places continued to serve as doorways, appearing where they were needed, providing passages between worlds for those who were ready. The network of magic that connected all these encounters was invisible to most, but absolutely real to those who had experienced it. Each blessed family, each touched individual, was a node in this network, a keeper of the secret that the world was far more wonderful than it appeared. They recognized each other sometimes, strangers passing on the street who would lock eyes and know, without words, that they shared the knowledge of magic. Lily's daughter grew up surrounded by this understanding, never questioning that the world was full of mystery and wonder. She played games that others might call imaginative, but which she knew were practice for seeing what others couldn't see. She talked to animals and plants as if they could understand her, and perhaps they could. She looked for magic everywhere and usually found it, not in dramatic, impossible ways, but in the small miracles that were everywhere for those who knew how to look. The constellation birthmark on her back was a reminder that she was part of something special. Chosen for reasons she might never fully understand, but didn't need to. And the story continued, weaving itself through time, each generation adding new chapters, new encounters, new confirmations that magic was real and present and available to those who approached the world with wonder and open hearts. The Starlight Bears, whether they were real creatures or manifestations of something even more mysterious, continued their work of blessing and reminding, appearing at just the right moments to just the right people, keeping alive the knowledge that had been in danger of being forgotten. This was their true gift, not just the moment of magic itself, but the lifetime of changed perspective that followed. Every person who had encountered them saw the world differently afterward, unable to return to the gray, mundane reality that most people accepted as all there was. They became beacons of possibility, living reminders that there was more to existence than what could be measured and proven and explained. They were the ones who still made wishes on stars, who felt the consciousness in old trees, who knew that love was a force as real and powerful as gravity. The rational world had no place for such people, dismissing them as dreamers or fantasists. But they knew something the rational world didn't. That mystery was not the enemy of truth, but its deepest expression. That magic was not the opposite of reality, but its hidden heart. They had been shown, in a furniture store on an ordinary afternoon, that the impossible was possible, that blessings came in the most unexpected forms, that the universe was conscious and caring and infinitely creative in its expressions of grace. Years turned to decades, decades to generations, but the story remained, passed down not just in words, but in the way the blessed families lived their lives. They were the ones who stopped to watch sunsets, who taught their children to look for shooting stars, who never lost the capacity for wonder that most people surrendered in the name of growing up. They knew that growing up didn't mean stopping believing in magic. It meant understanding that magic was not separate from ordinary life but woven through it, available to anyone who remembered how to see. The Starlight Bears had given them this gift, this sight, this understanding. And in return, they kept the magic alive in the world, not through grand gestures or dramatic proclamations, but through the simple act of remaining open to wonder. Every time they chose to see beauty where others saw only ordinariness. Every time they felt the consciousness in nature that science couldn't quite explain. Every time they trusted their intuition over logic and found themselves exactly where they needed to be, they were honoring the blessing they had received. And somewhere, in the spaces between what is and what might be, the Starlight Bears continued their eternal work. They appeared in wardrobes and closets, in attics and basements, in all the forgotten corners where magic could still slip through. They blessed babies and families, dreamers and believers, all those who still had room in their hearts for the impossible. They were the guardians of wonder, the keepers of the secret that the world was not a machine, but a living, conscious, magical entity that responded to love and belief and open-hearted curiosity. The story had no ending because magic has no ending. It continues, always and forever, weaving through lives and generations, touching those who are ready to be touched, blessing those who are ready to be blessed. Somewhere, right now, in a place you might pass by without noticing, a wardrobe door is opening, and a child is seeing something impossible, something wonderful, something that will change their life forever. The Starlight Bears are still out there, still working their quiet magic, still reminding us that we are part of something infinitely larger and more wonderful than we usually remember. And for those who have eyes to see, who have been touched by this magic either directly or through the stories of others, the world is forever transformed. Every ordinary moment contains the possibility of the extraordinary. Every closed door might open onto wonder. Every child's pointing finger might be directing us toward a miracle we're too busy or too cynical to see. The magic is always there, always available, always waiting for us to remember how to believe. This is the true story of the Starlight Bear. Not just what happened in a furniture store one afternoon, but what continues to happen every day in the lives of those who were blessed by that encounter. It's a story about how one moment of magic can ripple through generations, how wonder can be inherited like eye color or the shape of a smile, how the universe sometimes shows us its hidden face just to remind us that we're part of something beautiful beyond our comprehension. The family that met the Starlight Bear that day didn't just receive a blessing, they became a blessing. Carriers of magic in a world that desperately needs to remember that magic is real. And now, you who have heard this story are part of it too, connected to the great network of wonder that spans time and space, invited to look at your own life and see where the magic might be hiding, waiting for you to notice it, to believe in it, to let it transform you as it transformed them. Because the Starlight Bears are not done with their work, they never will be. As long as there are children to bless and families to touch and cynics to convert back into believers, they will continue appearing in impossible places at perfect moments, reminding us all that we live in a universe far more magical than we dare to believe. The wardrobe doors are still opening somewhere. The bears made of starlight are still emerging to bless those who are ready. The magic continues, and it always will, as long as there are hearts open enough to receive it.